Hey everyone, and welcome to this Expert Technical Explainer. Today, I'll be stepping in as your cloud solution architect and senior technical consultant. And honestly, we are going to go deep. We're going to architect a production-grade, highly secure, sovereign landing zone for generative AI right inside Microsoft Azure. Look, public reports of recent cyber incidents have taught us a really harsh lesson. Policy without technical enforcement is literally just a suggestion. We can't rely on paper promises anymore. We need hard-coded infrastructure. To put the current landscape into perspective, get this. While 62% of boards are now dedicating time to AI strategy, only 27% have actually codified oversight into their charters. That is a massive governance gap, and it's one we absolutely have to close, especially with the strict high-risk system compliance deadlines of the EU AI Act coming up fast in August 2026. We've got to transition our mindset from passive awareness to rigorous technical enforcement. All right, here's our flight plan for today. We'll start with the AI governance mandate, then map out our sovereign architecture blueprint. After that, we'll dive right into a detailed implementation walkthrough, cover human oversight and controls, establish our validation and fallback procedures, and finally, wrap things up for the executive team. So let's kick things off with Section 1, the AI governance mandate and how we go about closing that gap. Moving right along to Section 2, the sovereign architecture blueprint. This is where we start structuring our defense. To move well beyond standard encryption, we're going to deploy a three-tier sovereign stack that focuses heavily on governance, hardware, and networking. We'll be using the Scales framework to do this. This framework essentially translates structural pillars into hard-coded data residency. It allows us to enforce true zero-trust principles across your entire tenant and lock down jurisdictional compliance using the Microsoft EU data boundary. Every single pillar we talk about here translates to a very specific technical configuration inside Azure. Which brings us to the concept of Level 3 sovereign controls. This is absolutely critical. You see, standard encryption, whether it's at rest or in transit, is honestly insufficient for high-sensitivity intellectual property when you're up against sophisticated platform-level threats. We have to isolate the memory during active AI inferencing. So we're actually moving the trust boundary all the way down to the physical silicon itself, using trusted execution environments. All right, Section 3, this is the really fun part, our detailed implementation walkthrough. Let's get into the step-by-step lab. This architectural matrix is brilliant because it maps the exact phases of the AI lifecycle directly to strict technical controls, ensuring comprehensive risk management at every step. For instance, think about the model training phase. You have high sensitivity, full dataset exposure there. The technical answer? Confidential VMs, customer-managed keys, and a strictly isolated VNet. And when we hit the retirement phase, we don't just hit delete. We execute cryptographic shredding to ensure total data destruction. Now, before deploying any of this, you have to ensure your production tenant has these exact prerequisites configured to establish the necessary governance hierarchy. First, you need the Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty to access the specific landing zone policy portfolios. You'll need Microsoft Purview to discover shadow AI and handle data classification, and Azure AI Foundry for provenance tracking. And critically, you need global and security admin roles to actually push these tenant-wide changes through. Let's actually build this hardware-rooted defense by provisioning highly secure compute nodes click by click. First up, over in Azure Machine Learning, you'll create a custom environment. Second, you explicitly select confidential VM SKUs, specifically those backed by Intel SGX or AMD SEV SNP processors. Finally, you lock down access by assigning a user-assigned managed identity, giving it strictly Key Vault crypto user permissions. That way, it can only access decryption keys when the hardware attestation fully passes. Next, we micro-segment. We execute these specific steps because entirely eliminating public internet exposure prevents shadow AI data leakage and satisfies strict NIST zero trust requirements. You'll go to your Azure OpenAI resource and completely disable public network access. Then, map a private endpoint directly to your workload VNet and bind it with a private DNS zone. Doing this makes the model effectively invisible to the public internet. Which brings us to Section 4, Human Oversight and Controls, focusing on enforcing Article 14 of the EU AI Act. A huge part of this required oversight is operational sovereignty. To achieve this, we configure Customer Lockbox as a mandatory workflow gate. This intercepts any Microsoft engineering support requests, guaranteeing you have absolute operational control. Even if the platform provider needs to fix a physical server issue on their end, your designated internal approver must explicitly click Approve to grant temporary just-in-time access. Furthermore, by utilizing infrastructure as code, specifically via Bicep, we technically mandate that no high-risk model serves outputs without an auditable, human-reviewed verification path. We deploy managed online endpoints, inject the human oversight required flag directly into the template, and integrate Azure AI content safety. This acts as an automated triage queue, instantly flagging toxic content, PII, or bias for your human reviewers before anything goes live. Now let's talk about worst-case scenarios in Section 5, validation and fallback procedures, because resilience is everything. Ask yourself this honestly. What actually happens during a sovereign boundary breach in your current setup? If telemetry indicates your AI system is serving outputs that bypass the judicial review gateway, or if data is drifting outside the EU boundary, your environment must react autonomously. You literally cannot wait around for a manual help desk ticket to be resolved. So, the crucial point here is implementing exact automated emergency mechanisms. We deploy a logic app kill switch to sever network peering instantly if a breach is detected. We also configure cryptographic shredding, which revokes your customer-managed keys inside your managed HSM, instantly rendering all training data and model weights completely unreadable globally. And finally, we set up automated rollbacks that trigger if explainability scores ever drop below an 80% threshold. Before a single byte of production data flows, you must rigorously validate your deployment using Custo query language and network path tracing. A pass means that NS-lookup from within your VNet resolves strictly to a 10.private IP, and Purview confirms absolute region pinning. A fail means the resource is resolving to a public IP. And listen, never just bypass a policy if it fails. You must use documented Azure policy exemptions to maintain a spotless audit trail. Finally, let's bring it all home in Section 6, our executive wrap-up. We're looking at compliance not as a roadblock, but as a catalyst. Closing the governance gap transforms regulatory hurdles into measurable ROI. Organizations that implement these structural guardrails aren't just compliant. They are actually 3.9 times more likely to experience critical business benefits from AI. The takeaway here? Good security doesn't slow you down, it actually accelerates your deployment. The technical fortress we've engineered today directly answers this mandate from industry leaders. By moving trust down to the hardware layer and enforcing governance via Azure policy and Bicep, we elevate your organization to the absolute highest tier of the board maturity model. So, the final question is this. Will your Azure AI deployment be a security liability, or will it be the compliant, sovereign catalyst for your enterprise's innovation? Take these deployment blueprints back to your tenant and start engineering your sovereign AI boundary today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.